think Kate might.
Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I am the festival director of Out on Film, Atlanta's LGBTQ film festival. This is our 35th anniversary year. We've had some amazing programming. Thanks to you all. Thanks to everybody who's watched our films this year. Thanks for all the filmmakers who've submitted us. It's been a phenomenal year. Two of our most popular shorts programs have been Ladies' Choice and Let's Laugh Again. And we have representatives from both blocks right now. And we're going to let all the filmmakers introduce themselves. Then we're going to jump into some questions. So why don't we start with John?
Hi, everybody. My name is John Klein. I'm the co-director of Static Space.
Great.
I'm Kate Black-Spence, also co-director of Static Space as well as writer.
Great.
Hi, my name is Emanuela Boisbouvier, and I'm the writer and director of Margins.
Hey, I'm Harris Doran, wrote, directed, edited. Welcome right back.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. But if we could maybe keep the same order, just tell us a little bit about how your films came up.
I'm actually going to pass this off to Kate, so
Okay.
Go ahead.
It was beginning of pandemic, and I had just written my first play, and I was really excited about pursuing that and writing that momentum, and the whole world shut down.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure what to do next. And a friend of mine, John Cannon, who actually I've never met, but I've read his books, and he's friended me because he's seen my web series. He sent me a message and was like, well, if you're looking to still write something, you can adapt this book that I wrote and turn it into a play. And this was a book he'd written years ago, and it was beautiful, and it was called Can You Hear Me? And it was all about isolation in different ways. And so it really struck me quite differently in that moment, and I thought that might be a great thing to adapt. I adapted that into a play in just a couple of months. I sent that to my friend John Klein, and John said we'd be crazy not to adapt it to a short film that we could actually shoot during the pandemic, because it would lend itself to telling an important story at the time and also keep everybody really safe, and we could shoot it isolated. So we did.
Okay, great.
So I also, during the pandemic, was in a relationship and was also sorting through a lot of visa stuff because I'm from Monaco originally.
Yeah.
So I was on the tail end of my student visa, trying to figure out how to transition into a work visa. And my partner at the time, my girlfriend, was helping me along the process. And this was right when the Black Lives Matter movement started coming about in May 2020. And so Margins came from a very autobiographical place of me wanting to support her in, everything that was going on, while also being very weary of what that meant for me as a person with kind of a complicated visa status, and knowing a lot of people throughout college who had been deported for really messed up reasons. So I just I wrote it after a sort of nightmare I had, and I was like, I need to put this on paper to digest it, and then decided, you know what, I'm going to make this into a movie, because I feel like there are very few stories that are told from like this kind of specific immigration perspective, and that were also set during this wave of protests. So yeah, that's kind of how I decided to make it.
Great, thank you. Harris.
So my EP who produced the film with me, Doris Kasap, she knew DDM, who's the rapper that stars in the film, and she wanted to do something with him for a long time. And I came up with a film idea that was inspired by him and his life. And I wrote it, we made it. Pretty much it. And it deals with it's a comedy, but it deals with, oppression. And I think that, in terms of people at the top trying to keep you down as queer people, I think we know sort of the maneuver of where at every step, it's sort of like someone's there to try and stop you. And so there's that sort of undercurrent in the film.
What I love about all these films is that, in a fairly compact amount of time, all these films are just so character driven. Can you talk about that? I mean, how you really focused on character with all these films, and not some of these films are a little bit longer than others, but let's talk a little bit about character and how you really maintain character throughout your work.
Something that really appealed to me about Static Space when I read the script was that it's because it's so focused on these two people in these two places and their relationship.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of frills and extra plot devices that kind of come into it. It's really just these two people. And then in making the short, initially when Kate was adapting the film, she was trying to kind of appeal to both sides of that story and tell Jamie's story in the barn and Noah's story on the ship. And like the first draft was like 45 pages of just dialogue between these two people. And I was like, well, okay, that's great. But like then there was this conversation we had about the point of view, if we focus the point of view almost exclusively on Jamie's perspective and make it really exclusive, not exclusively, but very much her story and what she's dealing with in terms of her, her prior relationship and her isolation and her sort of discovering of her identity as a bisexual woman and just as a woman and as someone in Indiana as well. That's a very specific sort of identifying mark for those of us in the Midwest in general. Just being able to focus on that and sort of get really kind of an intimate insight into her mind made the film, I think, more accessible in a lot of ways too, and more universal. Like by being so specific about this one character, it makes it something anyone can kind of find a piece of her that they relate to, which is what I got out of that as well.
Okay.
So I think for margins, it was interesting because a lot of the film, actually, the two main characters are not together. They're like kind of on their own journeys, trying to find their ways back to each other. And I thought that was cool because I think in a lot of relationship stories, it's kind of like two people working to figure out an outcome. And because of the circumstances of the film, they're not able to communicate and they're not able to sort out their issues face to face. And so I think that led to kind of naturally the development of two very strong characters individually who each have their own struggles. Lucy, be it with immigration and like this need for independence and doing things herself, and Kai, like this need for protection and also fighting for justice. And the one thing that ties them is the love that they have for each other. So I think in like writing and developing the story, it was awesome to be able to just feature these two super strong women who like aren't codependent and don't need each other to survive, but just over and over again choose like the path of empathy and the path of love. So yeah, it was fun I act in it as well, and my co-star Doyin Domingo was just an incredible resource and brought in so much of her own life and stories, and I think it just helped to build this story and this chemistry very, very naturally, which was awesome.
Harris.
I mean, DDM, if you see my movie, is like such a big character in life, and so writing for him was a joy. And I have a theater background, so I'd say a lot of my stuff is really like character driven. Plot is created by people trying to achieve something and obstacles. So I think it's like that's just my approach in terms of that. And I think just growing up with a really loud family, I understand like really big people can be real too. And so I just tend to write from that place.
This is a question that we generally ask all of our filmmakers. Can you talk about representation, why it's important to have queer artists making these stories, and why it's important to have positive images? I mean, I know that when I was growing up, I mean, the films I watched in the 70s and 80s were always just so dour and just negative. I mean, we're in an era now where we can have positive images that we need, but can you talk about the importance of that and the importance of having, again, queer people behind the camera and in front of the camera?
Yeah, for me, I know Static Space was a really great opportunity for me as a bi woman to just write about someone who is bi, who's also in a relationship or starting to have a relationship or romantic feelings for someone who's lesbian, and just let that be its own love story.
Yeah.
In the same way that Notebook was allowed to just be a love story, and that it wasn't about, it's not a straight love story, it's just a love story. And I have been so hungry for this for such a long time, and I just have kept waiting to see this sort of gentle queer love stories exist without explaining trauma or without, explaining how we came out and what that process was like, and oh, it's so hard. It's not that we don't all have that experience, and it's still very important to comment on those types of stories, but we're ready also to move into another niche. And I know this was something I was so tired of waiting for that it made me write my first screenplay. So I've been really excited to get to do this. It's been therapeutic for me, but what shocks me, and John and I have talked about this, we made this for ourselves in pandemic. We wanted to create art for other artists and for ourselves, and I hoped that a lot of our friends would see it. I had no expectations that this would speak to so many people on such large scales
Yeah.
that it has, and it tells me that this is speaking to a need. So yeah,
Okay.
those are my thoughts.
Oh, nice.
Well, and along with that too, though, is that the say like people behind the camera telling those stories. I think that it was so important to us to have diversity on all levels on the crew as well. Like to tell a story like this, I think it's important to have all walks of life be a part of that process, to have that representation as well. And so that was a real crucial sort of priority for both of us throughout the process. Just I don't know. It adds an extra layer of identity and understanding and empathy to a production and to the making of a film or a play or any type of art when you have people who have lived those experiences and can channel themselves into the work in some way. And so that was really important for us.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like in terms of in front of the camera, what Kate said, I'm like, yes. I feel like there a lot of what we see in terms of queer people on screen, a lot of the times it's this very like trauma focused story, which again is like super important to share. And when I was writing margins, I was like, let's just have it be these two women who are dating. We don't care if they're bi or queer or lesbian. Like they're just in love and they're dealing with their stuff. And I was like, I don't even want to address any of the other stuff because I just want it to be a given. And if people have issues with it, they have issues with it. So I felt like that was important, and also having it be an interracial queer couple, I think that also adds another layer of there aren't that many on screen, especially like interracial women. And so I kind of wanted those things to be a given and not really make it a thing, just have it be what it is and the people that they are. And in terms of behind the camera, I was doing a lot of research on the female gaze and on the queer gaze, and how as a woman director and a queer woman director, I'm automatically going to have a different way that I'm going to approach the story. And I think having a crew that was mostly queer or non-binary or just like people who are diverse and have different points of view was so helpful to me as well as a director, because this was my first time directing anything. And my first AD, who was this incredible non-binary person, came up to me a couple of times and was like, I don't want to overstep, but I think that this scene, maybe we can add this shot. And I was like, yes, like, I love that. Like, give me your feedback and give me your thoughts. And these are things that I think if we had an all straight crew behind, they might not think of these different suggestions. So for me, it was hugely inspiring and helpful to just have more queer people on set help out.
Oh, great. Okay. Harris.
I mean, while my movie is very, very queer, I didn't think of it as a queer movie at all. Actually, when I was writing it, like even when it's contextualized that way, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, it's queer, but and there's like so much that's queer about it. But for me, like it just was, I was just writing it, and the thing, like it's not, the obstacles that he's dealing with are not queer obstacles. They're like every people obstacles. You know, it's like his boss is trying to get him, and his friend is trying to help him, and so I think it resonates with me, the idea of like, okay, so much is about like queer trauma, and like my movie's not about queer trauma. It's about like people trauma. It's more like class trauma. The movie deals with class. My film is very diverse, the cast. And so it was really important to me that the crew were also as diverse so that people could feel ownership when they walked onto set.
Yeah.
And so my crew was majority POC and or queer. And that was something that was very difficult for that to happen. And we shot in Baltimore, and
Yeah.
so I was asking for this, and I was being told like, no, sorry, they moved away from Baltimore, they're not here, right? And so I basically kept asking, and people were really annoyed with me too because I just kept going with it. I was like, no, 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 well, let's find them, let's train them. And so eventually, what ended up happening was I found like people who had just graduated from school who I
Yeah.
trained, like, so our AD, like, I trained him, and I ended up like spending time training people to make sure like, no, like, it's not just like they moved away. It's like, okay, well, no, let's look harder and let's train them. And so that's what I did. Yeah, and it definitely, people were like, there's enough diversity, you've done enough, we hear you. I'm like, no, it's not enough.
That's good. So I'm just curious because the last couple of years, we've had to deal with COVID and staying indoors, and I'm sure this affected you all as filmmakers. It's affected us as festivals. It's affected audiences as well about what they're able to watch and being able to see it with their community. I'm just wondering, have you all had the chance to see the film with an audience yet? And if so, what was that reaction like?
We just got to do this weekend.
Oh, nice.
This weekend, yeah, this past weekend, because we, being an indie film, traveling to festivals is very challenging budget wise, so we just don't get to do that very much. I had been to a festival or two by myself. Kate had been to a festival by herself, so like we just hadn't got to do it together and just be a part of an experience like that in a room with 60 or so people. It was really, it's always heartening, I think, to watch the film and real, like, I'm sure you all feel this way as well. It's like when you watch a film and for the first time with an audience, you sort of see the places where people gasp or people laugh or people just, you understand that they're connecting on a certain level to what's going on. And I think because of the nature of our film being so much about a person who is isolated, like we say it all the time, it's not a COVID movie, but it has the vibe of that because of the plot, but also because of what we were all going through at the time. I feel like all of us being in that isolation, I think those emotions couldn't help but come across in the visuals, in Kate's performance, in Mariah's performance, and all of those things. I mean, we had when we did auditions, when we did rehearsals, it was all on Zoom. Like everything was on Zoom for us until we got to set and just bubbled there for a weekend. So I feel like those things couldn't help but kind of be wedded into the fabric of the movie that we were making.
Great.
Okay, if you have anything else to kind of add to that. But
the only thing I'll throw out there is seeing this film, which takes place in Indiana and is very much deals with, without directly dealing with, the challenges of being queer in Indiana. Seeing it in a film fest in Indiana has been by far my favorite experience. It was a queer film fest in Indiana at that. And there is a line that I've seen this in Iowa and other places. The reaction in Indiana, there's a line that is otherwise not funny, where Jamie goes to the end of the barn and she's looking up at space and she says, "I wish I was there. I wish I was an astronaut. I think I hate Indiana." And it normally isn't funny. Everyone laughed in that audience, and it was the kind of laugh of like recognition of being like, yeah, it's hard. And it was such again, one of those really wonderful moments that it felt like the words that were written were a hug to the audience, and it was really exciting. And I love watching this with Indiana audiences.
Nice.
Yeah, we just got to have our first like in-person screening 2 weeks ago in Palm Springs for the LGBTQ festival there, and it was amazing. It was so just great to be in person and meet other filmmakers and hear, as you were saying, like where the audience gasps and where they like emote, and in ways that when I've watched it the 50,000 times I have, I'm like, okay, at this point, I kind of expect things to happen. And it really just made it refreshing. And a lot of people came up to us afterwards and were just very moved by it. And I think even just that is what makes it worth it. Like if one person walks out of the room and is like, wow, thank you for telling the story, I'm like, okay, the job's done. And I think that's definitely, like, in my opinion, the biggest takeaway from online screenings is being able to see people and their work as well and be moved by what they're telling. So it's been amazing, and I hope that there's more to come.
Great. Harris?
So my movie premiered at Sundance this year, which got canceled because of COVID.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, 2 weeks before, like plans were made of going there for the big premiere and then canceled. So, so the premiere was online. And so I had not seen, that was January. And so I didn't get to see it on a movie theater screen or with an audience until April at Aspen Shorts Fest. And so it felt like so much had happened that maybe wasn't real life because everything was on the computer. And so then being in the audience at Aspen was like so incredible because it was like, oh, well, there's my movie. It's big on a screen and people are reacting to it. Like human beings are seeing this. It's not just like me and my editing bay. And so it was like really crazy because I'd had such a tremendous experience leading up to that before that just felt really unreal. So it was really not until Aspen, until seeing it on a screen with people that it felt like, oh, I made a movie. Oh, I actually made something, you know? And so that was amazing. That was an amazing experience.
That's great. I'm happy for all of
Yeah.
you. Okay, so Static Space and Margins are part of the Ladies' Choice program, which is streaming until Sunday, October 9th. If I come right back, it's part of our Let's Laugh Again program, which again streams until Sunday, October 9th. These are some amazing films, two great programs. Our audiences have loved them so far. Thank you all for making these films. Thank you all for sharing, submitting these films to us. And more importantly, thank you all for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can all work together again in the future.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.